how Rust is it complementary? Is it competitive? I get the interoperability part of Rust, but I really want to, as builders in the ecosystem, want to understand what role that plays, and then how do you see banks in the future? Let's say if you zoom out 5 to 10 years. I'll Omar, if you
Yeah.
want to take this, so Danish.
Yeah. No, Omar, if you want to talk about Rust, I mean, I think that, you're looking to become a participant in some way. So I mean, I can take the other.
You're the only regulated one, so I'll let you take it.
So I'll talk about licensing. I don't think we have too many licenses. I think we are heavily regulated, some for good reason, and some maybe over-regulated, to be fair. But so we've gone through our audit just recently, and it was quite intense. But honestly, many parts of it were very, I should say, commiserate with the risks that Pakistan faces. And just terms of not just identity fraud and money laundering and CFT and all of that stuff, but also cybersecurity risk, right? So to be fair, we've taken a very cooperative role with the central bank, and just generally in feedback that we do receive. They I think especially the BSD department, also the PSD, but they really analyze and look at making sure that we have the processes, infrastructure in place to ward off cybersecurity threats. So and mitigate fraud, have transaction monitoring. So in fact, so I think from that perspective, I think they're actually needed in Pakistan, to be fair. I think other things like experimentation, allowing you to do other doing innovative business models, you shouldn't have to run behind the central bank for that. So I think that from that perspective, maybe there should be some flexibility. But again, look, we have a balance payment crisis. We had low reserves. So many models that worked on remittance outwards were difficult. So and rightly so. So central bank is also constrained by a lot of things. So but I think general experimentation, maybe iterating, sandbox could be improved. But in terms of licensing and audit, I'll tell you honestly, I actually think after going through this process, very difficult and I should say very detailed review, I think it's commiserate with the risks that not just in Pakistan but also just global cybersecurity risk. That's my view on licensing.
And Omar, what role do you see banks playing in the future? I mean, do you look at them from your perspective as the balance sheet that you'll actually get to start lending in the future? Because obviously just transactions alone is not going to make a big fintech platform. It will, like from a transaction point of view, but in the long run, there's got to be an end game. So walk me through some of that.
Yeah, I think, the way central bank has structured their group, the cluster is development finance and payments, and then a bunch of other ancillary departments that support it, the IT and all of that, which means financing, how they regulated or subsidized it through their schemes, and then payments systems, whether it's Rust or RTGS or the policy and oversight aspect of it. All of that is structured in one big cluster that reports to a single deputy governor. And I think this is sort of characteristic of the approach that payments and financing have to go together. And in our case, and probably in everyone's case, is that payments is a prelude to a larger financing play. So with the other third element, which is now covered partially through an EMI license, is the deposit play of how you can make money through treasury income and by attracting deposits. So I think the three aspects, we will still see more experimentation around fintechs, both regulated and non-regulated, trying to scale payments and then morphing into financing. And then obviously the next step would be, how do you get something out of deposit mobilization? Those are the three pillars of a strong fintech platform. And if you think about it, that if you're doing all three, then the real question is, why aren't you a bank? When these licenses were being distributed, if you've noticed that there was another conversation in parallel of why some people never applied for that license. And I think it's a question that maybe, Danish would have to ask himself, or I'd have to ask myself, or, Kinu would have to ask themselves, is why aren't you guys applying for it? And I feel that it's really about respecting the evolution, that once you get the payments, and you build your strength around payments, because that's your means to entrenchment, then you can spring into deposits or into financing. So if that is the play, and for however long it takes, then I think it poses as a serious threat for banks to ramp up their game. They can do that in many ways, either go through a transformational journey themselves, that either they convert towards a digital, which within their existing license structure, they can absolutely do it. They don't need a separate license for that. And the other way is that they can collaborate or acquire fintechs. And globally, you've seen that that's been happening, that they start acquiring fintechs where they feel that it's just quicker to do it this way. We will see that happening in Pakistan. I think there have been some early attempts. If this economic impact that we saw in the last 1.5 years didn't happen, we would have probably seen some deals as well. But it's slowed down. Eventually, they'll come back at the table when they start realizing that some of these regulated and non-regulated fintechs are catching up with their payments play and their financing play and the deposits play. So they'll have to either transform really quickly, or they will have to acquire some of these. Now, the big ones who are addicted to treasury income will obviously be looking at acquisitions, because for them, that change of DNA, it's like, takes a really long time for the elephant to turn. So they will have to probably look at collaborations and acquisitions, and they'll have to set up separate wings. And Faisal, you would know this, that big banks like Citibank or Standard Chartered, they all have venture arms, and that's the exact motive behind it, that they just simply think that we're not going to make it ourselves, we'll just have to buy it. And we should start seeing that probably in 3 to 4 years maximum, that they will start either acquiring or jointly creating, if they think that they're slow in transforming themselves, because they will be slow in transforming themselves, not just because of how they're structured, but also because they are addicted to treasury income. So it just, that kind of success breeds a lot of complacency.
Faisal, it's like you contribute here on the B2B lending space and B2B payment space as well. That, I think Danish alluded to this, and he's absolutely right. I mean, the problem is not the number of licenses. The problem might be the number of licenses given the size of the pie that we have right now. But the size of the potential pie, I tell you, there's a lot more space for licenses. And the missing link here is the availability of data, and documenting the data. Just for example, closed loop lending. I mean, if you really look at fast moving fintech ecosystems, cash flow based lending is a real part of that slice. But that doesn't exist here in Pakistan, other than the salaried class, credit card, their thing. But B2B ke andar, that doesn't even exist, or at least I'm not aware. And then of course that is the chicken and the egg syndrome, because the data isn't there and the reliable data and all that. So yeah, I think where the impetus has to be created is creating those kind of data lakes, having those players talk to each other, so that different parts of those data lakes are then plotted in one continuous flow. They create that story, and based on that, then you can credit rate a certain entity and then close that loop. In fact, not by going to suppliers, but by doing deposit mobilization, so that you have recourse to that money in case you have that small percentage of NPLs. Sorry.